Hello, muffins. I'm Olive Von Topp, burlesque performer and empowerment coach, and I want to talk to you about shame, which is everyone's favorite topic. So, shame is an emotion. It is a big emotion. We feel it very deeply. So often we don't know when we're in shame, and we have a very strong reaction to it. And because everything we do or don't do is to feel or not feel an emotion, so often we have behaviors in reaction to our shame that we don't want to be having, that are leading to outcomes in our lives that we don't want. So often, because, as you've heard me, I'm sure, talk about, our thoughts create our feelings, which drive our actions, which creates our outcomes, our lives, essentially. So often when we feel shame, we react to it because we're like, I don't want to feel that. That doesn't feel good. So we do all the things we can do. We buffer, we numb out, we eat the food, we yell at our kids, we, have the sex, whatever, not in the good way, just to get some other feeling. We often have these sort of unhealthy coping strategies that ironically create more shame for us. So when I'm working with folks, one of the first things we look at, particularly when there's certain actions that are driving someone's life, or they want to change their life, and we can kind of see that these are the actions, we go back and we realize the feeling that's driving that is shame. So what are the thoughts that are driving that feeling? And so often the thoughts are related to what I call shame scripts. So these stories that we've been told, these scripts that have been ingrained in us since we were little about how we should act and be and look. And if should is there, it's usually an indication that it is that there might be shame there, because we have these ideas ingrained in our subconscious, even if we don't consciously believe them all the time, or we can be critical about it. They're ingrained in our subconscious about how we should be. And so first of all, that's what we get clear on. What is the thought that's driving the thing? And Brene Brown, who is a shame researcher, talks about shame resilience. And so one of the things, there's four keys to shame resilience. Noticing your shame triggers is the first one. So what are the things that typically trigger your shame? There's a bunch of categories, and she had done a lot of research around shame in women specifically. And so, I think there's 12 categories. It's body image, sex, motherhood, career. I don't know. There's a bunch. There's 12. Anyway, so getting really clear on what those are for you is the first step in shame resilience, because you're most likely to be I'm in shame right now. I'm experiencing shame. I use the example that sometimes I'll have a really weird sort of reaction when I feel like I'm being blamed for something, or somebody's, I've done something wrong, let's say at work, and I have made a mistake. I have this automatic sort of reaction where I might get defensive or deflect. And so I've realized that what's happening is that I'm feeling shame, and I am deflecting that away. It almost feels like it's out of control, but it's not. But a really helpful activity that that Brene Brown has around shame is because shame is linked to our perceptions and how we're perceived. Again, what we should be, shouldn't be. The questions are how do I want to be perceived? So in my example, I want to be perceived as a hard worker, as competent, as trustworthy. How do I not want to be perceived? I don't want to be perceived as incompetent, or that I, am creating more work for other people, or that I don't know what I'm doing. I guess that's incompetency. And then what are the things that people will miss about me? The important things that people would miss about me if they perceived me in that way. Things I actually am a really competent worker, and I do try really hard, and I am, a good team player at blah, blah, blah. Which is just really helpful, I think, in getting at what is at stake for you and like why these might be triggers. But I digress. So, second point she has in shame resilience, which is also happens to be what I do with clients, unrelated, is critical awareness. So when we discover or when we look at our thoughts around that are driving shame, where do they come from? This is something I do in all the coaching, is like, whose thoughts are these? Who benefits from me believing them? Why would anyone want me to believe these? And really just getting critical and curious about where the thoughts come from, because again, they're not necessarily our thoughts. They're ingrained in us. And so we can also choose to have another thought. We can choose to have a different thought if we want to. So once we've mapped out the sort of shame model, where we like, these are the thoughts that I are thinking, that's the feeling of shame, this is how I act, and this is my results. Secondly, okay, let's go back to, so after that, we're going to say like, whose thoughts are these? Get really critical about them. Who benefits? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe they're not my thoughts. Another question that, before we move into other thoughts, is what does shame feel like? What does shame feel like in my body? So how do I know when I'm in shame, when I'm experiencing shame? What does that feel like? And really being able to sit with and describe what shame feels like is super helpful. It's helpful because it gets us in our bodies. It also allows us to know when we're experiencing shame, and also to just be willing to experience the sensations of shame in our bodies. Because the thing that we are so afraid of is a feeling which is broken down, is really just like energy or sensation in our bodies. Yeah, it doesn't feel great, but like when we think about it in the most basic form, it's just a sensation in my body. So like, can I build up some shame tolerance when I can sit with shame and get curious about like what that feels like in my body and sort of follow that around? That's another thing we do. And that is a way that I work with clients to build shame resilience, I guess. Or like, we do that with all emotions, feeling them in our bodies. But shame tends to be a really big one for people. And then asking ourselves, like, what do I do when I feel shame? What are those sort of trigger responses, or like that inaction? Like, do I scroll mindlessly on whatever social media? Do I pick a fight with my partner? Like, whatever it is, just so we're aware of like how shame is operating in our lives. Separately, Brene Brown says the third thing around shame resilience is like seeking empathy. So talking to a friend, or a friend who's empathetic, and because we need that connection, and that, somebody that validates our shame. And like, shame can't exist in when it's not spoken. No, shame can't exist when it's spoken. It thrives in secrecy. So when we talk about shame, it loses some of its power. When somebody says, yeah, I have that, I know what that's like too, it loses some of its power. And I would say that offering ourselves compassion, so while that's obviously super important, we can also give ourselves some of that compassion when we're experiencing shame, and understand the common humanity in it, where we're like, oh, this is the thing that people experience. I'm not the only person to have experienced shame. I'm not the only person to have gone through something similar. Like, it's okay. I'm human. So really offering ourselves some of that compassion. Just to finish off Brene Brown's points, her fourth one is that speaking shame. So like addressing the shame with somebody who's causing you to feel it. So, when you, one example that comes to mind is a person whose mother always comments on her weight when she goes to see her. So, she speaks shame in the sense that she says, like, when you do that, I know you're trying to motivate me, but it's really painful, and it actually, has the opposite effect, and it creates a rift between us. And this is what when I come, I need you to like not comment on my weight. So that's Brene Brown's shame resilience is know your shame triggers, have some critical awareness of those thoughts that create to shame, speak shame to other, like create connection and empathy with someone and speak shame. And so my pieces are, noticing what your thoughts are around shame. What does shame feel like in my body? What do I do when I feel shame? Offering myself some compassion, and then, creating new thoughts that help me. So that kind of is that compassion piece, but like what kind of thoughts create some relief when I'm feeling shame? And it might be something like, yeah, I'm human and that's okay. I don't need to be perfect. Or like, especially when we've done this analysis of like where that thought comes from, just like, oh, that's not my thought. That's like society telling me that I need to be this way. So really getting at some of those thoughts that create some relief, that sort of soothe our core negative beliefs that are, generally related to our worth and come from childhood. And that's an ongoing process, like practicing those things every day, but even just offering yourself a compassionate alternative thought in the moment about like, so for my example of like me messing up at work, let's say, like compassionate thought I can tell myself is like, this isn't, lots of people mess up. You're allowed to make mistakes. People mess up. It's not the end of the world. And another thought I can tell myself is like, I'm human and I'm going to make mistakes, and that doesn't touch my worth. Like, this is just part of the human experience. And that's okay. And that helps me with shame. So there you have it. There's some thoughts on shame. And if you want to learn more, you can visit my website. I talk about all kinds of things related to, self-love and thought work and, sort of mindfulness being in our bodies. olivevontopp.com. And you can find me on the stuff and the things of the media. I'm at Olive Von Topp on all the social medias. So yeah, get at me if you have questions, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Love you. Bye.